MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11. With me is Josh Shepardson at BChad50, breaking down the Wednesday evening slate, and we're looking at the 7:05 and later games, and a pretty quick and easy one to kind of dissect as far as hitters and pitchers go. We pretty much kind of knew where we were going from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, the prep for the show, if the listeners were to be a fly on the wall, we were on the same page on everything. We pretty much liked the same guys, same take on the pitchers. So scary, because I feel like when there's that kind of agreement, that's just when things go bad. But kidding aside, we'll start with the 7:05 start times and go right to New York, where the Astros are playing the Yankees. Yankees are slight favorites. Michael Pineda getting the ball for them. Colin McHugh getting the ball for the Astros. I like Colin McHugh, but I don't like him tonight. I don't like right-handers at Yankee Stadium. They have the left-handed bats to set the table there. They got some power in the heart of their order, and guys like A-Rod and Teixeira. I wouldn't go as far as to say that I love them as a stack. They are stackable, but the guy that I like in this one is Pineda on the other side, in GPPs only. And that includes on two-pitcher sites like multi-pitcher sites like DraftKings. Too erratic. I gave a comp that I almost sort of regret before the show, but I think it's fair to throw out there to the listeners. Michael Pineda to me feels like a little bit like the modern-day Ricky Nolasco. If you're a stats nerd like I am, that kind of broke in with Fangraphs, really getting big, then guy that always had better ERA estimators than ERA. That hasn't always been the case for Pineda, but it was last year. And one number that stands out is a strand rate. Struggled with a sub 70% strand rate, but this isn't exactly a recent development for Pineda. If you look over his minor league strand rates, he's had issues at times with it. So guy that maybe isn't the most consistent, but really good walk rate, really good strikeout rate, facing a lineup that does strike out quite a bit. So there is some upside for Pineda here. Of course, the downside is that he lets runners on, and he just isn't as effective with runners on. And there are some big power hitters in that Astros lineup. Gotta love Carlos Correa. I like him a little bit more on DraftKings, where you can do some things with your second starting pitcher. Maybe squeeze in some guys like Danny Valencia or Darren Ruff at third or outfield or first or outfield, to squeeze a guy like Carlos Correa on your lineup. A little bit tougher to get him into your FanDuel lineup, especially if you're going to pay out for the top arm, Strasburg tonight. But I do like Correa. I mean, I believe it was Chris Liss that said it on Twitter the other day. I mean, he's kind of looking like peak A-Rod. And I mean, we're one game into his second season in the league, but power, speed, he's doing everything. Doesn't have a big strikeout rate. He's at Yankee Stadium. Got to like the upside there. The other names that I like here, Jason Castro, if you want to punt at catcher, left-handed power, always a pretty decent option there. Same with Colby Rasmus in the outfield, but I don't like Rasmus quite as much because the opportunity cost for moving down to him from some of the other outfield options is one that I don't like to pay. But I do like Preston Tucker a little bit in this one, because I think he's going to be super low owned. Guy that's playing designated hitter with Evan Gattis opening the year on the DL. Really cheap salary on DraftKings and FanDuel. And because he doesn't really have that name recognition yet, it is quite ownable. 120 WRC plus against right-handed pitching last year. Can hit for power. And again, left-handed park factors at Yankee Stadium are really nice.
Yeah, and to touch on Pineda, I think I don't see much middle ground for him tonight. I think it's going to be either completely one way or the other, which is kind of why he's a GPP play. If I could maybe pin him for six innings, maybe 3 earned runs, 5-6 strikeouts, I'd be okay with it, with a shot at a win. But I think he's either going to be pretty on with that strikeout rate that's pretty decent, especially with Houston in that young team and the way they whiff at times. To touch on Correa, I think he is one of the top options at shortstop. I like DK where you can put Corey Seager at third base. I think it would be interesting, especially in tournaments, to maybe make that move where you have a Seager Correa type lineup, and kind of differentiate yourself from the field there. I definitely liked all the mentions you had of those Yankees bats. I think Brian McCann is a guy who his huge ISO numbers at home. It's unbelievable, the splits that he has there. And I mean, any guy at Yankee Stadium, a lefty, is going to be, I mean, me and you might have a shot at taking out one there. So, yeah, I mean, lefties against McHugh. I think there are some single guys that I will be putting into my lineups, as well as A-Rod on the right side there. And you pretty much touched on everyone that I like from this game.
Yeah, really, really good call on McCann. That was an obvious oversight on my part. But most expensive catcher on the slate, but under 3,000 on FanDuel, under 4,000 on DraftKings. actually squeeze him into your cash games lineups if you really want to, especially if you're not going to pay up for Harper. We'll touch on him a little bit later, obviously, but the numbers that McCann's put up at home with the Yankees since 2014 are really quite good, especially the power numbers. And last year was more than just a all or nothing hitter at Yankee Stadium against righties. So love him tonight. Next up in the 7:05 time frame is Kyle Gibson and the Twins playing in Baltimore against Yovani Gallardo. I'm a big Gibson sucker. I know that the odds makers have a big-ish total on that game tonight. Not a lot of big totals around the league. I mean, last check it was 8.5, I believe. It's been between 8 and 8.5 since I've been following it the other day. Twins are actually small underdogs, but really like Gibson's ground ball rate, which plays well at Camden Yards. Like the fact that he scaled back his fastball usage last year and started leaning on his secondary pitches, his slider, his changeup, even his curve, which he doesn't use really enough. And it did kind of take a step back last year. But those pitches can miss some bats. You can get lefties and righties out with them. And the fact is his strikeout rate doesn't look good. It was below average last year, about 5% below the league average. But he actually had a league average swinging strike rate. So it looks like it's an issue of sequencing and maybe just scaling back even more on that fastball usage. And this is a lineup that can punch out guys like Chris Davis, Pedro Alvarez, even Mark Trumbo in righty-righty matchups is fairly strikeout prone. So this is a fairly high upside matchup for him. There is some downside to using him, but his price is really low, so he doesn't have to give you much to hit value on DraftKings as your SP2. Also checks in as a really cheap option on FanDuel at 65 if you're looking for a GPP play. And well, again, while that strikeout rate doesn't look big on the surface, there are some underlying things that make me think that he's going to strike out more batters this year. And obviously that's what you're looking for, some strikeouts from your GPP hurler, but that salary relief is big too, and you can get some monster bats in your lineup with him. Kind of differentiate yourself from the field. He's a guy that I think will be owned on under 5% of rosters probably in GPPs. On the other side, Yovani Gallardo, I want no part of him. Love the Twins hitters in this one. Miguel Sano, namely. But Brian Dozier on FanDuel, not so much on DraftKings. Good price as a GPP swerve off of the more popular plays at second base, I think. And then Byung-Ho Park on FanDuel is just $2,600. Gives you some stacking possibilities on there. I think that they're kind of an off-the-radar stack. Maybe not my favorite stack, but if you're going to stick in multiple GPP entries, they're one that's probably going to be low-owned. And Yovani Gallardo, not a very good pitcher, pitches to contact these days. And pitching to contact at Camden Yards isn't necessarily a good idea with some of the new sluggers in that Minnesota Twins lineup.
Yeah, and I think, you made a good point about the pricing differences on that Twins team. Comparing them from DK to FanDuel there. I mean, Dozier's, 4,500. You got guys like Daniel Murphy, 4,000, Colton Wong, who we'll touch on, Chase Utley as well if you want to go of value. And I think they are a decent stack team because they do offer some power and some upside. And as you mentioned, Gallardo, a contact guy. Obviously, Camden Yards is one of the better places for hitters there. I think this is probably the only spot where we disagree on is Gibson. I'm a little scared. I mean, I can understand using him for his cheap price tag. I think I'm looking at more Mike Leake, just a couple hundred more than him as an SP2. Out in PNC, we talked before the show about Pittsburgh not having a lot of lefties against them, and lefties is really where his kind of danger area, which is more average or so at times. He's not a big strikeout guy either, but I think looking at that game, I think he has a fair chance of coming out on top for a win. I think Gibson does as well. I just feel Leake's a little bit safer, but I can't argue with either guys there.
Yeah, and I mean that's the next 7:05 game there. So nice segue. Mike Leake, you're right. A lot of righties in that Pittsburgh lineup. Lower over/under total and better pitchers park. So definitely some factors working in Leake's favor. Opposing him is Juan Nicasio, who is kind of got the hype machine going right now. Ray Siraj. At this point, if you're not familiar with him, familiarize yourself with him. He's a pitching coach for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he's done reclamation projects like crazy. Nicasio pitched really well in the bullpen for the Dodgers last year, but as a fastball slider pitcher, does have a massive platoon split. lefties torched him last year. I mean, granted, it was under 100 plate appearances against him, but 412 WOBA allowed to left-handed batters last year. That's not going to cut it as a starter, especially when the Cardinals can trot out a number of lefties. Guys like Matt Adams. They could possibly even stick Brandon Moss in the outfield, give one of their right-handed corner outfielders a day off. But Colton Wong, like you mentioned, really nice value play on FanDuel. More appropriately priced probably on DraftKings. But you've also got Matt Carpenter leading things off. And Carpenter is maybe not my favorite cash game play, but pretty darn close to it among hitters. I mean, between that big platoon split for Nicasio and Matt Carpenter's awesome numbers against righties and affordable price tag on both sites, I mean, I think he's pretty much a lock for my cash games rosters, though there are some other good third base options that we'll touch on still. And as far as Nicasio goes, though, we have seen some fastball slider guys make it work. The most notable one is Tyson Ross, and he is in a pitcher-friendly ballpark, and the odds makers have this game total low. So I don't always defer to Vegas, but they kind of know what they're doing at this point. So definitely makes him intriguing as an SP2 on DraftKings. I hate his FanDuel price. I just think that there are better options for cheaper than him. But on DraftKings, he's 6,100. There's not a cheaper pitcher out there. You can put him with the top arm, Steven Strasburg, and just kind of load up on bats at that point. So I do think that he's worth a bullet or two, but I do also really like that Cardinal stack, especially if Matheny does the right thing and maybe moves some of these lefties up in the order and splits up some of his right-handed bats.
Yeah, and the Nicasio call, I think you can kind of compare him to Sanchez from last night as far as what you can possibly get. He does have that decent upside. I don't think he'll go quite as deep into a game, but I think he does have a pretty decent upside. On that Pirate side, I'm not looking to attack league too much. You named all the Cardinals I like. Gregory Polanco, he's a cheaper outfielder I like, who's off to a hot start. I mean, he's probably the only one. I'm not searching for too much offense in this game, but I think Polanco's a decent cash game option right now, especially with a guy who, obviously no stolen bases through 2 games, but he can also add that factor to his kind of barrage of scoring that he brings to the table. So outside of him, and the Cardinals lefties, it's not a lot from that game, and you're just kind of hoping Matheny does do the right thing and get some guys in good spots.
Yeah, I'll really hate to see 2 through 4 of Piscotty, Holiday, and Brandel Grichuk. Get one of those lefties up there. Get Matt Adams up there or something. But as far as the Pirates go, I agree with you. Polanco is really the only name that I'm looking at, unless John Jaso magically gains catcher eligibility again between now and start times. But obviously, kidding aside, that the Pirates just not a team that I want to go after very righty heavy, and just not the kind of lefties that I'm looking to attack Mike Leake with. But moving on to the 7-10 start times, we got Aaron Nola pitching against Brandon Finnegan in Cincinnati. Finnegan made 4 starts last year and struggled with home runs, but did have some interesting underlying stats. You neutralize, or if you regress that home run rate to more of the league average, had a xFIP of under 4, so there's some upside there. Did have huge control issues in the minors, but they didn't really surface when he made his 4 starts for the Reds. And he did strike out some batters. So I think that he is an interesting play on FanDuel, where he's just $6,100. On DraftKings, I like some of the other cheap SP2s better, but he is in the mix as possible, single bullet or a couple bullets. The Reds are actually surprisingly big favorites, not big relative to most lines, but big relative to tonight's lines. I was a little bit shocked to see that. Total isn't exactly huge or anything. Aaron Nola, not great stuff, gets by on pitchability, and pitchability means the low 90s fastball that if he makes mistakes with it, leaves a yard. So I had a ugly home run per 9 last year. Home runs were an issue for him, and Great American Ballpark's a bad ballpark to have home run issues in. Gotta like Joey Votto tonight, even though the price tag is pretty big. I think that's going to make him more of a GPP only play for me, but a good GPP only play. Devin Mesoraco is the guy that I think really is the one to key in on in this contest. Cheap on both sides. Catcher, if you're not paying for McCann, really pretty slim pickings. So that leaves Mesoraco as a guy with big pop, hitting 6th, so far this year in the one game that they've played. Not a great lineup spot, but not that different than most of the other catchers in the league, so not bad. And those right-handed park factors and his pop play really well against Aaron Nola. Otherwise, maybe you could take a GPP flyer on Jay Bruce. That power is always in play. Great American Ballpark again. Big park factors for home runs. They're fairly stackable towards the top of the order too. Maybe grab a cheap guy like Cozart to get you that salary relief at shortstop, and just stack the 1 through 4, or if you're on DraftKings, even the 1 through 6. But from the Philadelphia side, the only name that I'm looking at is Maikel Franco, and that's namely on FanDuel, but he's not priced badly on DraftKings. In play on both, but big numbers against lefties last year, big power numbers in general, lots of contact. So and a big spring, which doesn't really mean a lot, but at least he's in form right now, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and the good thing about Franco is the strikeout rate's not as high as, a guy of his who has an MLB status of only, basically a year. And that's something that I like from him, and I think he kind of earns maybe not a cash game wrap in this game, but going forward throughout the season, I think I'll lean on him a little more. And third base is just so deep tonight, and I'm kind of bummed that he's mixed into that because I do like him in this spot. A little bit of a weather concern with this game. There is some rain predicted. That's one to keep an eye on. Obviously, me and you, we're not meteorologists, so we can't see what's going to happen throughout the hours as the day goes on. But that could take some plays out of this, which would be disappointing. But overall, I think that I was going to treat this game as kind of a GPP target anyway, just with some of the prices from the Reds team. Looking at Votto, Bruce and his inconsistency at times, definitely worth a shot just because of the park factors, and his power numbers are pretty impressive when he gets going. Cesar Hernandez, he's a guy, up top in that lineup is pretty cheap, decent on base percentage against left-handed pitching last season. Outside of that, I think it's a game that features many obvious plays and not much else. And as you mentioned, Mesoraco, one of the better value guys on tonight's slate.
Yep. Total agreement. The last of the 7-10 games is going to be the Nationals at the Braves, and it's the Steven Strasburg start facing Bud Norris. And I mean, it almost doesn't matter who he's facing. Strasburg, the way he pitched at the end of last year, is in kind of rarefied air. I mean, you can't really put him in Clayton Kershaw air because he hasn't done it for the full season like that. But my God, his last 10 starts from the beginning of August on, he was putting up Craig Kimbrell numbers as a starter, basically. I mean, he just flat out shoved, sub-2 ERA, 0.75 whip, huge strikeout rate, striking out over 30% of batters, I believe the rate was. Didn't walk anybody. And this is an Atlanta offense that's just putrid. They don't have anybody to attack him with. Really, Strasburg's overall numbers last year dragged down a little bit by some early season starts. So hard to imagine that he'll fly under the radar, but you might have just a handful of gamers that should be using him that won't be. You mentioned possible thunderstorms before the show. Obviously worth keeping an eye on, but as long as it looks like there's not going to be any delays or anything that's going to hamper his ability to get in a clean start, there's no other direction to go in cash games. You absolutely have to use Steven Strasburg. He's about a -200 favorite, by far the biggest favorite on the slate, by far the most talented pitcher on the slate, and facing just, a putrid offense. So gotta love Strasburg. If there are weather concerns, you and I said it, probably going to be scaling back our handle tonight, and that makes sense. I mean, you don't want to be on either side of it going wrong. Having Strasburg and having his start range shortened, or fading him and then watching him go out and shove when the weather doesn't end up impacting the game. As far as the hitters in this one, using zero Braves, that's probably not a shocker. But on the national side of things, I'll pay for Harper in cash games. I think there are enough value plays around the league on tonight's slate that you can get Strasburg and Harper comfortably on the same team and not have just dead roster spots. In GPPs, obviously, the upside is through the roof for Harper. Daniel Murphy's a guy that you mentioned earlier, one of my favorite cash games plays tonight. Great play at second base on both sides, but also third base eligible on DraftKings. Because of the depth of the third base position on DraftKings, do think he's better used at the Keystone, but Does give you some creative possibilities, kind of like you talked about with Correa and Seager, using the shortstop and third base eligibility to your advantage. You can do kind of the same thing, since most people are going to be using Murphy at second base most likely on DraftKings. Maybe you use Utley and him, or Wong and him, and fade Carpenter and Franco and some of the other top options at third base. Otherwise, in that game, not really loving any other nationals. Norris was hit hard by everybody last year. So, I mean, you can certainly consider a guy like Anthony Rendon. I wouldn't use Zimmerman. There's just too much talent on the first base for me to feel good about that. Maybe in stacks, just because you need to get that lineup synergy. But as a standalone, no thank you. But yeah, I mean, the gifts that Murphy and Harper are giving you in that contest, I don't feel bad about not highlighting really any other names, because those are two big gifts for daily gamers tonight, I think.
Yeah, definitely, especially with Rendon being a similar price tag of Murphy. Murphy's just much more of a consistent player. Rendon, we've seen go through awful stretches at times of just not even being looked at for me when I research. And as far as Harper goes, I just think he's much like Nelson Cruz last night. He's a guy who's, yes, he's expensive, but there's plenty of value to fit him in, and you just kind of build your lineups around him tonight. And there are some cheaper guys, at pitcher to pair up down low, because you're not likely going to be sitting in that 8-9K range to match up with Strasburg on DK. So you're going to have some decent salary left over. And I think that's just, you plug Strasburg and Harper in and just move on from there.
Yep. Next up, we're going to go to the later games. We got the Dodgers at the Padres. Kente Maeda against Andrew Kashner. Maeda, this is going to be his first Major League Baseball start, dominated in NPB. Had a strong spring, too, which I don't usually put much stock in spring stats, but with a guy who's making the cultural adjustment to coming to live in another country, I like seeing a guy that put up numbers and not get rattled by just all that he has to take in. Great control over in Japan. Good strikeout rates. Doesn't have that electric stuff like a Darvish or a Masahiro Tanaka. Despite, I mean, Mark DeRosa was raving about his stuff on MLB Network this morning, but by and large, the scouting reports on him are more good stuff. Good pitchability, middle of the rotation arm, but that's plenty good enough against a Pod squad that just can't touch anyone right now. Haven't scored any runs in the first two games of the year. Were dreadful against right-handed pitchers last year, and that was a lineup that had Justin Upton in it still. No Upton in it. Well, and Upton in it, not the Upton in it. So not a bad thing to have Melvin Upton against you. Maeda looks like a strong play, especially on FanDuel in GPPs where it's just $7,200. It's a really cheap price tag for him. On DraftKings, bigger price tag, priced like an ace basically at over $9,000. But as you and I talked about before the show, there are a lot of value guys, and you can stick him and Strasburg on the same lineup together and plug in maybe a few more platoon players than you'd usually stick in there, but some platoon guys that probably aren't going to come out of games. Guys like, we'll get to the next game, but a couple of A's we'll say. But Darren Ruff, like we talked about a little bit in the Reds game, good price tag at first base and outfield on both sides, crushes left-handed pitching. So he's a guy that you can save some salary with on both sides. But on DraftKings specifically, if you're looking to pair Maeda with Strasburg, on FanDuel, it's really Strasburg or bust at pitcher in cash games anyway. So Maeda, nice GPP consideration with price, with upside, with matchup, with ballpark. I mean, Petco Park is a run-suppressing venue. And as far as the Dodgers hitters go, gotta like a lot of these guys. I mean, right off the bat, you got Chase Utley as a value play on both sides, hitting leadoff for them. Andrew Kashner was tattooed by left-handed batters last year. Over a 380 WOBA allowed to them, I believe. Over a 500 slugging allowed to left-handed batters. So you're starting off with a couple right out of the gate with Chase Utley. Corey Seager, great play at both sides. Really, he's the chalk at shortstop for me tonight. As good as Correa is, the price difference just forces Correa into that chalk situation, Seager into the chalk situation. Third, probably going to be Justin Turner. Not a big fan because it is a righty-righty matchup. It's right back to the lefties again. You've got Adrian Gonzalez batting fourth. Really nice play on DraftKings. Love the price tag there. Not a bad price tag on FanDuel either. Can get him on your rosters there, cash games or GPPs. Yasiel Puig has been hitting fifth. But again, more lefties. Jock Peterson and Carl Crawford hitting sixth and seventh. So lots of lefties to get after Andrew Kashner with, like all of them, really stackable lineup, even though it is pitcher-friendly Petco Park. Some of these guys have pop, and pop home runs are enhanced at Petco Park, as we talked about yesterday. Going to keep talking about and reminding listeners all year. But yes, it's pitcher-friendly, but if you got a guy that can put a charge into the ball, guys like Adrian Gonzalez, Corey Seager, they do get a nice little park factor for home runs. So using none of the Padres, really not a fan of any of those guys tonight. But love Dodgers hitters and like Maeda tonight.
Yeah, it's odd because, everything that sets up Maeda is right there. And I think the only thing that's not there is he just has no track record in the MLB. But I think just looking at tonight's slate, looking at the options around him, he's just by far, a top 3 play pitcher tonight going up against a Padres team that really struggles. I was kind of hoping his price on DraftKings would be a little bit lower, but still, it's not a bad option. Pairing him up with Strasburg, I think it's pretty safe as well. And, he's a guy who doesn't walk a ton of batters, which is nice. And that's something that makes me feel a bit more comfortable using him in all formats tonight, just because he's not going to go out there and possibly walk 3 or 4 guys, within the first 4 or 5 innings, which is nice, unless the nerves get to him, which is something that could happen. I guess you can take that into consideration. But yeah, the Dodgers guys, I think those are kind of going to be my base guys to center my teams around tonight. As you mentioned, Gonzalez, that price tag on DK, 4,200. He's the 5th most expensive first baseman there, and I just think that's far too cheap in this matchup against Cashner that really struggle with lefties. And as you mentioned, the home run factors for left-handed hitters at Petco is definitely a plus for them.
Yeah, and I can't believe his price on DraftKings at first base. I kind of whined about it yesterday on the pod. I'll do the same today. It's like 2015 all over again. These Dodgers prices are just so low relative to what they probably should be. It's almost like your hand is forced into using some of these guys. Now, twist my arm to use Corey Seager. It doesn't take much to get me to use him. Same with Adrian Gonzalez tonight. Thankfully, it's not one of your more loaded slates with Miguel Cabrera and Edwin Encarnacion and all these other first basemen that you want to use, but you kind of almost have to use Gonzalez because of price considerations tonight. That's not really the case. You got Chris Davis, sure. You've got Joey Votto, but Votto's price tag is steep. So it is a lot easier to plug him in and just take that savings and be happy with it. The last game on the slate is the Chicago White Sox at the Oakland Athletics. Carlos Rodon against Sonny Gray. Gray was supposed to start on opening day, but was scratched due to food poisoning. Far be it for me to play doctor and speculate too much, but if all that vomiting and all that nonsense has him a little weakened, definitely might be worth speculating on with a stack or two of the White Sox, or even or more likely some single bullets. I do like Jose Abreu, always like Jose Abreu, but also like Adam Eaton in that contest. That's the guy that I really like, the table setter for them. Posted a career year against righties last year. It's been above average against righties in general, but even if you're not in that speculating on Sonny Gray's health camp, he had a bad second half last year, at least by the ERA estimators. It was only an upper 3s ERA, so it's probably a little bit much to say that it was a bad second half, but it wasn't good. He had a big first half, and then all of a sudden his velocity just started declining month after month. He stopped using his slider as much, which was his best swing and miss pitch. So unless he's going to go back to using that slider more, unless he finds some of these missing tips on his fastball, and he did have dead arm at the end of spring training, I think there's a lot of reasons to like using some of these White Sox hitters against him, and I want no part of using Sonny Gray tonight. On the other side of things, Carlos Rodon, really exciting young starter, electric stuff, but struggled with righties last year, gave up a 350 WOBA, and he's facing an A's team that's willing to work walks, which is bad for a pitcher that has some control issues. Did have a high walk, well above average walk rate last year. So if he's not finding the strike zone, he's got some guys that'll work walks and and take advantage of that. I think the A's make for a nice stack that might go under the radar. One, because it's a West Coast game. Two, because it's at O.co. And also because it's just the A's. I mean, this isn't a group of exciting, flashy players, but they're guys that make the most of what they do because they platoon out there. So guys like Josh Fegley, Danny Valencia, who at this point, Danny Valencia, one of my favorite plays on the slate, really like him on DraftKings where you can use him at third base or the outfield because third base is so deep, but 2,500 on FanDuel. If you can't quite reach up to Carpenter or Franco, that's a really cheap play to stick in there that is hitting cleanup. Made big strides against righties last year, but getting back to the righties against Rodon, there's Billy Butler, there's Marcus Semien, and and Chris Davis. Love the price on DraftKings. Not a bad price on FanDuel either, under 3,000. But 3,300 is just an absolute steal for Chris Davis on DraftKings. He's one of those guys that if you're going to roster Harper and Strasburg, you might as well make it 3 hitters. You can just automatically slot in. 3,300 for Chris Davis is just too cheap to pass up when you're looking for salary relief and looking for a guy who can put up some numbers and not just a fill the gap glue guy. So those are the guys that I'm looking at tonight.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. And as you mentioned, Gray really struggled in that second half. 1.28 home runs per 9 after a 0.36 in the first half last season. So as you mentioned, he just kind of lost it. The K percentage went down about 5% from the first half to the second. And I'm curious to see if that does continue into the season. The spring training numbers indicated that it possibly could. And, looking at some of these White Sox guys, I think they are great pivots off of some of the more popular plays tonight. I like Eaton in all formats. I think he's a pretty safe on-base guy. Can kind of spray the ball wherever he wants, use that speed, which is always nice in cash games. As you mentioned, the A's guys, I mean, Valencia is – I'm a big fan of Valencia. I mean,
Same here.
I used him a lot last year, even when he went to Oakland. It just didn't matter with that par change. He still hit the ball well. He hits lefties well. Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm not paying up at third base, which I might not be able to, with Harper and those big names. I think Valencia's an easy plug and play there. So, yeah, you pretty much touch on everyone. Davis, probably a guy who's going to be another auto play for me if I'm using that format of Maeda, Strasburg, and Harper.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, that's going to wrap things up here with the Slate Breakdown. Check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.